Tragedy is one event that takes everyone unaware. It can creep in on a hot summer, the icy or windy night, freezing your heart before you could register it. No one ever prepares for it, and that was the story of 7-month-old pregnant Elena Kim. Married to Chongmin Kim, a Korean serving in the United States Army, was like signing a consent form to accept whatever news that gets thrown at you. Just a couple of months ago, they giggled over the phone, the usual FaceTime, and repeated, "I love you" chants. Elena rubbed over her belly bump while Chongmin promised he would be back. "Just one more operation, my love, and the boys would be on their way home," he assured. "It's gonna be an easy-peasy task, and before you know it, I'd be ringing that doorbell with your favorite set of flowers." Elena smiled at each promise, hopeful, though the cold nights were a different tale. The loneliness. The moment she pressed his shirts against her nostril just to inhale his scent and feel him close. Time ticked. Circling calendar date. But everything took a turn on the 22nd of October, 2019. Before we get into the story, real quick, if you're coming across my contents for the first time, kindly stick around because over here, we do not offer the regular. Stories on this channel are crafted to express human experiences and lessons of life in a way it has never been told before. So if that's your kind of content, kindly stick around. While you're at it, smash that subscribe button and like the content so that you can help push these stories to millions of people who deserve to hear it. Now, let's get back into the story. The morning smelled like brown butter and cinnamon. Elena Kim stood at the kitchen counter in her house in Smyrna, Georgia, her hands dusted white with flour, her belly round and full beneath a faded yellow apron. 7 months. 7 months of carrying a life, of talking to him through the thin wall of her skin. She was humming. An old earth, wind and fire song, the kind her mother used to play on Sunday mornings while she pressed her hair and told her to straighten up, stand tall, carry yourself like you know who you are. Elena was carrying herself just fine. She had learned to carry everything. The cookies were for Chongmin. Welcome home cookies, his favorites, the ones with the dark chocolate pressed into the center, soft enough to give but firm enough to hold their shape. He was supposed to be home in 11 days. 11 days felt like a cruelty when you had already counted them down from 300. She pressed a cookie cutter into the dough and heard the clean snap of it, that perfect, satisfying sound. She pressed her palm flat against her belly and said, "Your daddy is almost home, baby." And Leo, she and Chongmin had already named him Leo after the ultrasound confirmed they were having a boy, kicked back. Like he knew. That was the last peaceful moment Elena Kim would have for a very long time. The knock came at 11:10 in the morning. She almost didn't hear it over the music. She turned the record player down, wiped her hands on the apron, and padded to the front door in her thick socks, supporting her waist as he strided towards the door. She opened it without looking through the peephole because this was a quiet street, a neighborly street, the kind where children still rode bikes and old men waved from their driveways. 2 men stood before her, dressed in military uniforms. Their faces had been arranged into something she would later understand was called professional grief, not cold, but closed. Between them, one held a folded triangle of fabric. Red, white, and blue pressed so tight and precise it looked like it had never been anything but a triangle. Like it had never flown, never breathed, never known wind. She chuckled in confusion while rubbing her belly gently. "Good morning, gentlemen. How may I help you?" she asked. The taller one said, "Ma'am, are you Elena Kim, wife of Staff Sergeant Chongmin Kim?" Her heart sank. Panic slowly began to set in. "Yes." The words came out unsure. "Any problem?" she asked, then looked down on the folded flag before her. She did not know what happened in the next 3 seconds. She was standing, and then she was not. Her knees hit the porch boards before she understood that her legs had given way, and the taller soldier caught her by the arm and she wrenched free of him because she did not want to be caught. She did not want to be steadied. Because if someone steadied her it meant this was real, and it was not real. It could not be real. It was not possible that she had counted all the way down from 300 to 11, and this was what 11 looked like. "Ma'am." "No." The word came out of her like something torn. No. No, no, you have the wrong house, you have the wrong. Chongmin is coming home. He is coming home in 11 days. You have the wrong. The taller soldier said gently, "Ma'am, I need you to." She grabbed the lapels of his uniform. Both hands. Full fists. The folded flag pressed between them, crushed against his chest and hers. She was pulling him toward her and pushing him away at the same moment, and she did not know which one she intended. She only knew that she could not let go, because if she let go, the world on the other side of her hands was a world where Chongmin was gone, and she would not live in that world. She refused. She absolutely refused. "Tell me you have the wrong house." Her voice was enormous and broken at the same time. "Please. Tell me you came to the wrong street. You wrote down the wrong address. Tell me." Mrs. Kim. The sound that came out of her then was not crying. Crying is what happens when you are sad. This was what happens when the center of a person's life is removed without warning. A sound from some depth that has no name, a sound that bent her forward at the waist while her hands were still gripping the uniform, a sound that traveled down the quiet street and startled a bird from the oak tree at the end of the yard. She wailed. The shorter soldier had lowered himself to her level on the porch. He was saying something, but she couldn't hear him. The taller one, the one whose lapels she was still gripping, placed both his hands over hers, very gently, not prying them loose but just covering them. She could feel the starched fabric of his jacket beneath her knuckles. She could feel her own pulse in her hands. She pressed her face into the flag. She put her face directly into the folded triangle and she held it there, her fingers finding the edges of the fabric, pressing it against her mouth and cheeks. It smelled of nothing, just laundered cloth, and she wept into it because she needed to give the grief somewhere to go, and this was the only thing they had brought her of him, this precisely folded nothing. "The Secretary of the Army," the taller soldier said, in a voice that had been trained for exactly this moment, "has asked me to express his deepest condolences." She pulled the flag harder against her face. She did not want condolences. She wanted Chongmin in her kitchen, eating the cookies she had made for him. She wanted to hear the particular sound of his laugh. Low, easy, a little surprised, like good things always caught him slightly off guard. She wanted him to put his hand on her belly and feel his son kick and look at her with those warm, precise eyes of his and say her name the way only he said it, compressed and certain, Ellie, like it was a fact about the universe. She wanted 11 days. Just 11 more days. The shorter soldier put his hand on her back. He did not rub it, he did not pat it, he just placed his palm there, flat and steady, the way you brace a wall you're afraid might fall. She stayed on those porch boards for a long time. The welcome home cookies burned in the oven, but none of them mattered. The only reason she was pushing through life was gone. She did not eat that first day, or the second, or the morning of the third. She knew she needed to eat. She knew there was a person inside her who needed her to eat. She lay on the cold tiles with her cheek pressed against them, and Chongmin's hoodie pulled over her belly like a blanket, and she talked to the baby in a voice barely above nothing. She told him about his father, a subtle way to manage her grief. She recalled the way Chongmin had looked the first time she saw him in that Seoul bus shelter, soaked through, slightly irritated at the rain, holding his backpack over his head with the self-consciousness of a man who does not usually need help and is not sure how to accept it. The way he had looked at her when she offered him half the umbrella, briefly startled, then something else. Something that rearranged itself into a smile he tried to suppress because it was too much, too soon, even though neither of them knew yet how little time they had. Their first date had been a bowl of sundubu jjigae in a spot near campus that was too small and too loud and perfect. He had asked her what brought her from Lagos to Seoul, and she had said, curiosity, and a scholarship. In that order. He had laughed that low surprised laugh of his, and she had thought, I am going to spend a very long time listening to that laugh. She had been right. She had just not known what a very long time would mean. She told the baby about the morning 2 years later when Chongmin had come to her with his military application in his hand and his eyes careful and serious. The way they went when he had already made a decision but was making room for her to shape it. The U.S. Army had a program. Special operations. It was what he had trained for his entire adult life. But it would mean leaving Korea, leaving the small apartment in Mapo-gu with the window box of herbs she kept on the sill, leaving the Korea she had grown to love, the Korea that had become the first place since her mother died in Nigeria. She was 14 when the fever took her, just 14, old enough to feel the absence like a missing limb, that had felt like something close to home. She had said yes before he finished explaining. He had looked at her for a moment with an expression she didn't have a word for, full and quiet, and grateful in a way that went too deep for the word grateful to hold. "You're sure?" he had said. She had said, "Chongmin, wherever you go is where I live." They moved to Smyrna, Georgia, in the spring of 2017. She had been happy. She had genuinely, specifically, daily been happy. She pressed her face into his hoodie and breathed him in, warm tears streaming down her face, and wondered, on that cold kitchen floor, how a person was supposed to reconstruct a life from the inside out when the person who had been its center was gone. She had done it before. She had done it at 14 when her mother died, and she had made herself small and brilliant and worthy of every scholarship that would take her somewhere. She knew how to start over from nothing. She had always known. But she had not known it would have to be this. She heard Leo kick. Strong and deliberate and real. She put both hands over him. She lay there with her palms over her son and the hoodie against her cheek, and she thought, "You are still here. You are still here, and he made you, and that means some part of him is still here too." She made herself get up. She made herself eat. She ate for Leo. That was the only reason, and it was enough. If you're already wondering what Elena's life is gonna look like after this tragic loss while dealing with her pregnancy, then, stay tuned. You don't want to click away now. And if you haven't, hit that subscribe button now. The funeral was held on November 5, 2019. The sky was the color of old dishwater. Fort Benning sent an honor guard. White gloves, a rifle salute that cracked the air so sharply Elena felt Leo flinch inside her. She put both hands over him. "It's okay," she said under her breath. She did not know who she was saying it to. She wore black. She had no one beside her, no family in this country, no mother to take her arm, no aunt to press her hand and console her. But grief is specific, and what she needed in that church was not company. It was Chongmin. Since she could not have Chongmin, she sat alone in the front row and held the folded flag against her chest and watched the honor guard with the flat, shattered attention of a woman who has already used up every tear she had and is now simply witnessing. She had no one beside her except her own survival instinct, which was, by this point, formidable. She was aware, from the moment she arrived, of the cold that radiated from the pew across the aisle. Sora Kim sat across from her. Chongmin's mother was a woman built from precision. 61 years old, charcoal wool coat, real pearls, the posture of someone who had decided very early in life that emotion was a room you locked from the outside. Her eyes were the same shape as Chongmin's, the slight upward tilt at the outer corner that Elena had first noticed in a Seoul bus shelter in the rain, except where his had always held warmth, hers held something cold and deliberate. Held the specific cold of calculation. Sora Kim had never approved of Elena. Not because Elena was unworthy. She had 2 degrees, a warmth that filled rooms, a laugh that made people lean closer. Sora disapproved because of Elena's skin color, her roots reaching into African soil. In the private court of her own heart, Sora Kim had judged her and had decided she was not what she had envisioned when she imagined her son's future. She had told Chongmin this. Once. He had looked at his mother with a devastation that was very quiet and said simply, "Then I am sorry for you, Amoni." And he had married Elena on a Saturday in May with hydrangeas in the church and his wife's laughter ringing off the stone walls, and Sora had sat in the third pew with her pearls and her silence. Now Chongmin was in the ground. And before the mourners had even fully dispersed, before the last handshake, before the final bow, Sora appeared at Elena's elbow like smoke. "Elena!" She said it like a verdict. Elena turned. Her eyes were dry. She had nothing left to cry with. "Not today," Elena said. Quietly. "Whatever this is, not today." Sora reached into her coat and produced a slim legal folder, cream-colored, the edges deliberate as everything else about her. She held it out. "Take it." Elena looked at the folder. She did not take it. Chongmin knew, Sora said, voice low and surgical. Before he deployed. He came to me. She opened the folder herself and turned it so Elena could see. Medical records. Laboratory reports. A finding at the bottom, azoospermia, sterility. Then printed screenshots of messages from an account Elena didn't recognize, words she had never typed, exchanges with a man whose name she had never heard. The world went narrow. Those are forged. They are not true. My husband wouldn't keep such information from me, Elena said. Prove it. Sora did not flinch. The child you carry is not my son's. The lawyers have been thorough. There is a morality clause in the Kim family trust. Given the documentation, the accounts Chongmin set up in your name have been frozen. A notice has been served. She closed the folder. The sound of it was a period. Elena looked at her. This woman at the edge of a grave where her own son lay. She looked at the pearls and the posture and the carefully maintained distance from anything that required real feeling, and she thought, you are wearing your grief like a costume. You are performing it. You do not feel what I feel because you never let yourself feel anything you couldn't control. I loved your son, Elena said. Her voice did not shake. I love your son. This child is his. You know it. Your lawyers know it. The only one in this room pretending otherwise is you. Something moved in Sora's eyes. Just once. Just a flicker, something raw and briefly visible, like a crack in glass. Then it was gone. And then Sora turned. She turned toward the people still gathered at the grave. The soldiers, the cousins, the neighbors from Smyrna, Chongmin's fellow unit members in their dress uniforms, and she spoke loudly enough for every one of them to hear. This woman, Sora announced, her voice carrying over the wet grass with the precision of someone who had practiced, has been living in my son's house and spending my son's money while carrying another man's child. She is not a widow. She is a liar. I want every person here to know what she is. Elena went completely still. The report. Sora raised the folder like a verdict in a courtroom. The financial records. This is what she is. The eyes. Elena felt them. The soldiers, the cousins, the neighbors, all of them turning. Some faces going uncertain. Some going uncomfortable. One older woman pressing her hand to her mouth. A soldier looking at his shoes. Elena's hands tightened around the flag at her chest. She walked toward Sora. Put that paper down, she said quietly. Sora raised it higher. Elena reached out and took it from her hand. Sora grabbed for it, and in the small chaos of that moment, her hand came up and caught Elena across the cheek. A sharp, open-palmed slap that cracked across the graveyard like a split branch. Elena's head snapped sideways. She stood still for a moment, cheek burning, the November air suddenly very cold against her skin. Then she turned her face back. She looked at Sora with an expression so controlled, so utterly without performance, that Sora took one involuntary step backward. Do not, Elena said, voice so low it was almost below sound, ever put your hands on me again. Then Chongmin's cousin Marcus was between them, and two of the honor guard soldiers were moving with quiet efficiency, and the graveyard broke into a low tangle of voices, and Elena stood in the middle of it all with a red cheek and both hands over her unborn son and the flag pressed to her chest, and she did not cry. She did not collapse. She thought, you will answer for this. Not today. But you will. She walked to her car and sat in it and gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles went pale, and she breathed, and she breathed, and she breathed. By the time she drove back to the house on the quiet street in Smyrna, a locksmith's van was pulling away from the curb. She sat in the car and watched it go. Then she got out and tried her key. It didn't turn. Her belongings were on the porch. Her clothes folded into a suitcase. A small tote bag. 2 cardboard boxes. Everything she had brought from Korea, everything she had accumulated in the 2 years of building a life in this house, stacked on the porch in the November cold like the contents of a storage unit that had been vacated. Elena stood in front of it. her bump protruding before her as she stood in total disbelief and exhaustion. The street was quiet. One neighbor across the road stood at their window and then moved away from it. Elena sat down on the top step. She sat there for a long time with her back against the locked door of the house she had made into a home, her hands on her belly, Leo moving under her palms in small, slow rolls like he was adjusting himself for a long wait. Why, Chong? Why would you leave me like this? Where do I go from here? Whom do I turn to? She burst into tears. The sky was getting dark. She stood up, picked up what she could carry, the tote bag, the suitcase. She left the boxes. She walked to her car and put them in. She got in. She sat behind the wheel for one moment, just one, letting herself feel the full weight of what had just happened, the specific shape of being removed from your own life by someone who had decided you didn't deserve it. She felt it. Then she put the car in drive. She had no family in Georgia. No family in America. She had a bank account that had been partially frozen, and a phone with some contacts in it, and a baby coming in 2 months, and the particular brand of stubbornness that had kept her alive and moving since she was 14 years old. That first night she slept in the car. The parking lot of a 24-hour pharmacy on the edge of Smyrna, the kind of place where the fluorescent lights stay on all night and nobody asks questions about the car that doesn't leave. She reclined the driver's seat as far as it would go. She pulled the only blanket from the tote bag over both herself and her belly. Leo kicked twice, settled. She lay in the blue-white light of that parking lot and stared at the ceiling of the car and did not sleep. The second night was colder. She found a church. She drove past it by accident, saw lights inside, went in because the alternative was the car again. They gave her a cot in a back room that smelled of old carpet and donated blankets. She did not tell them she was pregnant. She did not want the conversation. She lay on the cot with her hand on her belly and listened to the pipes in the walls and thought about Chongmin, the way she thought about him constantly in those days, not with nostalgia but with a kind of urgent inventory, trying to memorize everything before the edges softened, trying to keep him sharp. By the 4th day she found a shelter that took pregnant women without making them explain themselves too much. A narrow room. A bed. Shared bathroom. She ate the meals they served at the long table with 6 other women whose faces were closed in various ways, each of them carrying something they hadn't chosen to carry. Elena fit there without effort. She had always fit wherever survival required her to. She filed the legal challenge from the shelter's shared computer, looking up attorneys on the library's free Wi-Fi during the day. The account freeze on her personal savings, the ones in her name alone, was unlocked within 6 weeks. Partial. Enough. Enough to move. On January 14, 2020, in a hospital in Atlanta that the shelter had connected her with, Elena gave birth to a boy. 6 pounds, 2 ounces. The nurse said, laughing, "That one knows what he wants," because the moment he arrived he hollered with an outrage that filled the delivery room, furious at the cold and the light and the audacity of a world that expected him before he was ready. Elena held him for the first time. He had Chongmin's eyes, the shape of them, the slight upward tilt at the outer corner. He had her mouth. He had, already, the expression of someone taking careful stock of his surroundings. In the room alone, just the two of them, the sleet ticking against the window, she said his name out loud for the first time. Leo. He turned his face toward the sound of her voice. She thought, "I will not let anything happen to you. I will not. Whatever that requires, I will do it. I have done harder things than this." She held him against her chest and she made that promise to him without words, with the full weight of her body and her intention and every ounce of the stubbornness that had kept her alive since Lagos, since Seoul, since the porch of a locked house in November with everything she owned in 2 bags. She had been broken open. But she was not broken. She sold her car at a ridiculous price out of desperation to avail her some cash to take care of her boy. Time wasn't friendly. It passed in a blink of an eye. Elena took up jobs as a domestic assistant, live-in, which meant room and board, which meant Leo had warmth and she could calculate the math without panic every morning. She was methodical, attentive, quick to notice what a space needed before anyone had to ask. She moved through 3 positions in 18 months, each one a small step forward, like crossing a river on stones that are just barely far enough apart. The first house, a retired judge in Druid Hills whose requirement was silence and whose irritant was clutter. Elena kept his house in a silence so precise it hummed. She left after 6 months when his son came to visit and said something about the live-in help that she declined to absorb without comment. She left with her dignity and a reference letter. The second house, a family with 3 children under 7 and a cottage for Elena and Leo that was damp in a way that worried her. She left. The third house, better. She stayed 8 months. Leo began to walk and then to run and to point at things with the imperial authority of a baby who has decided the world owes him explanations. She taught him the name of everything: cloud, cup, window, door. Every night before sleep she told him about his father. She kept Chongmin alive in the telling, kept him specific and real, because Leo deserved to know who he came from. Then she came to work for General Arthur Bankole. The posting: Premium Domestic Assistant, Residential Estate Management, Buckhead, Atlanta. Private Household. Discretion required. Leo-friendly environment considered. Those 4 words. She applied because of those 4 words. General Arthur Bankole was 67, Nigerian-American, retired 4-star general, founder of Bankole Tech, worth $3 billion and operating his own house like a man who has decided that the furniture is the company he deserves. Tall, broad-shouldered, gray at the temples. He moved through the rooms with the gravity of someone carrying something invisible that never put itself down. His staff walked around him the way you walk around a bonfire. Elena walked through. She did her work, she greeted him when she passed, she kept moving. She did not perform deference. She was simply present, and then efficiently absent. One morning he came into the kitchen to find her at the breakfast table reading Leo a picture book, the coffee just finishing. He stood in the doorway a beat too long. Leo looked up at him with no intimidation whatsoever and said, "You're very big." "Leo," Elena said. "It's accurate," the general said, and the corner of his mouth did something very small and very involuntary. He poured his coffee and left. Elena filed this away. There was a nephew, Victor Bankole, 34, sharp-dressed, the kind of man whose laughter always came a half-second too early, like he was anticipating the joke he'd written himself. He visited twice a week with the general's health tonic, a green-black liquid in a small unlabeled bottle he described as an Ayurvedic preparation. He made a performance of presenting it, his warmth thick and theatrical, the warmth of a man who is performing for a specific audience. Elena said nothing. She watched. She watched the general grow slower. His hands, which she had first seen steady as a surgeon's, developed a slight hesitation. His color shifted, gray at the edges, a fatigue that sleep wasn't correcting. Elena had spent 4 years as a military wife, sitting beside Chongmin while he studied his combat medic manuals, absorbing the information the way she absorbed everything. Quietly, completely, without announcing it. She knew what a compromised heart looked like. She knew the faint organic smell of digitalis underneath a herbal cover, sweet and persistent. She did not say a word to anyone. Instead, she began to swap the tonic. She sourced empty bottles of the same size from the recycling, filled them with blended Morina and Spirulina, dark green, sufficiently bitter, and exchanged them before Victor's visits. The originals went into a sealed Ziploc bag in the back of the freezer, behind a container of egusi soup. Evidence first. Always evidence first. For 3 weeks she sat in the staff cottage after Leo slept, watching the lights of the main house, carrying the secret the way she had learned to carry most things, without putting it down, without showing she was carrying it at all. So far, I am sure this story is speaking to someone who is trying to give up after a situation. No, sweetheart. Get your butt up and push past that barrier. Find that reason and find a purpose to keep pushing through each day. Now, let's spread this gospel by subscribing, liking, and sharing this content to as many people as you can. On a Wednesday morning in March 2022, the general's heart gave up. He collapsed. He was on a video call with his board of directors when his body simply stopped cooperating. His assistant found him on the floor, the call still open, 11 faces in small squares staring in silence. Elena was in the ambulance before Victor arrived. She had reached the general first. She had been in the corridor outside his study, and she had known the sound, had known it the moment she heard the chair and then the silence that followed. She had cleared his airway. She had held his hand in the back of the ambulance and talked to him steadily, calmly, the way she talked to Leo in the middle of the night when something frightened him. Just her voice. Just the steady insistence of her presence. He was conscious when they brought him in. His eyes found hers. "The maid," he said weakly, with something that was almost dignity. "The maid," she said. "You're going to be fine." She did not know if this was true. She said it with enough conviction that she saw him relax his jaw. Sometimes that is enough. Victor arrived 40 minutes later with 2 attorneys and a pre-assembled expression of concern. He swept into the waiting room trailing urgency, his eyes passing over Elena in the corner with Leo asleep against her shoulder. "Just a maid. Just furniture. Good." The doctor explained the Bombay blood phenotype. Rare, extraordinarily rare, the kind of medical fact that narrows the field of compatible donors to near impossible. Without a transfusion, the next 12 hours were a gamble. Victor stepped forward immediately to be tested. A few moments later, the results came out. Incompatible. Elena stood up. Victor's eyes sharpened. "Test me," she said. "This is a very generous offer from the help," Victor said smoothly. "But I don't think." "Mr. Bankole." Elena looked at him directly. "You just failed the test. I am the other option. Do you want your uncle to survive tonight or not?" The room was very quiet. They tested her. The doctor came back with a face that had rearranged itself. He crossed the room, past Victor, past the attorneys, and stopped in front of Elena. "Miss Sterling," he said, her maiden name from the intake form. "The blood type is a match." He paused. Moments later, Elena returned to the reception after blood was drawn. They waited for the doctor to come out with the news. "We are happy to announce that Mr. Arthur is fine now." But something else came up. The doctor's face twisted. "What is it, sir?" Elena's curiosity heightened. "The hospital system cross-referenced your profile and triggered a kinship sequencing alert. First-degree biological relationship." Elena looked at him. Her mouth was dry. "Could you explain what that means in simple terms?" She asked. "It means the general is your father," the doctor explained. A sudden silence struck the environment. Elena stood confused and overwhelmed at the same time as she tried to process the information. Her eyes were slowly becoming glassy with tears. "The general is awake," the doctor said. "He's asking for you." He said. He checked the tablet. "He said he wants to see his daughter." He looked up at her. Apparently, he had filed a search with an international adoption registry 25 years ago. A daughter named Adiz, taken from a Lagos hospital during a riot in 1999. Your intake form lists your birth city as Lagos and your birth year as 1999. The waiting room was completely still. "My birth name," Elena said slowly, "was Adiz. The man who raised me in Atlanta. He always said he found me. He never explained what he meant. He died when I was 12. On her left shoulder, half hidden under her sleeve, was a birthmark she had carried her whole life. A shape like a crescent moon lying on its side. Her auntie back in Lagos used to call it an Oja mark. A belonging mark, the kind that means you are already claimed by something before the world gets to you. The general's signet ring, sitting on the bedside table of room 412, bore the same shape pressed into gold. The crest of the Bankole family, a moon and a river, worn by every firstborn child of the line since 1947. She handed Leo to the nurse, who took him with immediate gentleness, and she walked into room 412. Arthur Bankole was propped against the hospital pillow, gray and diminished in the way that illness makes people smaller than themselves. He looked at her when she came through the door. He looked at her the way people look at things they have been afraid to hope for, that specific, controlled hunger. He said, in Yoruba, the words her auntie had always said to her back in Lagos. The words Elena had never known the origin of, had always felt were something remembered rather than learned. Omomi, Emorii, my child, I see you. And Elena Kim, who had stood at a bus bench with one suitcase and not broken, who had carried Leo through the hardest years without breaking, who had been slapped at a funeral and locked out of her own home and had slept in her car and had gotten up from all of it and kept moving, sat down beside this man who was her father and let herself, finally, be found. Victor was arrested within the week. Elena gave the frozen tonic bottles to the hospital toxicologist the morning after the collapse. I should have done this sooner, she told the detective, but I needed to be certain. The digitalis was confirmed. Victor was charged with attempted poisoning and removed from all bankroll holdings. In the courthouse, he looked at Elena with an expression that was trying to be contemptuous and landing instead on bewildered, unable to process that the maid had seen him. Arthur, recovering, asked questions, reviewed documents. He wept once, alone in his room, and when Elena came upon him he did not hide it. He said, 25 years is a long time to blame yourself. And she said, then let's not spend another day on blame. The Bankol Tech Board had objections when Arthur announced Elena's appointment as Vice President of Stakeholder Development. One board member leaned back and said, with the confidence of someone who has never been told no, with respect, General, she hasn't got an MBA. Elena looked at him. With respect, I restructured 2 failing household operations using systems I developed while managing an infant on a single income. I can document the methodology. Can you document yours? I'll wait. Arthur looked at the ceiling. She understood later that he was suppressing something close to delight. She had sat in worse rooms. She had sat on a porch step in November with everything she owned in 2 bags. A boardroom was just a room. She learned the business the way she learned everything, by paying attention to what others performed and what they actually did. She read every report given to her, then went back and read the ones she hadn't been given. She asked the questions other people were afraid to ask because they worried about looking like they didn't know the answer. Within 8 months, she had restructured 2 failing divisions and built a community tech initiative in South Atlanta that put Bankol Tech on the cover of 4 industry publications. Leo came to the office on Saturdays and drew pictures at the corner of her desk. Arthur brought him a small Yoruba drum, and the 2 of them, the stern old general and the small boy with his father's eyes, sat on the office floor and made a noise that disrupted a conference call next door and concerned neither of them whatsoever. Elena stood in the doorway watching them and felt something she had almost forgotten the name of. Peace. Just a moment of it. Everything about Elena was beginning to take shape, except the emptiness she still felt over Chongmin's death. It wasn't long until that changed. Julian Vance walked into the Bankol Tech Summit in April 2023. American. Chicago. 31 and handsome in the way requiring maintenance. A tech investor with a real portfolio. He found her after his panel, directly, no pretense of accident, and said, "You're Elena Kim. I've read your restructuring white paper. Smartest thing in the summit packet." It was also the only thing written by someone who's managed a domestic budget, she said. Which is where real infrastructure thinking starts. He laughed. Genuinely caught. Most people were not prepared for her. Coffee. Dinner 3 weeks later. A conversation that went 4 hours. Julian listened with the full-body attention of someone who understood that listening is its own form of persuasion. He asked about Chongmin once. She told him enough. He said, "He sounds like a man worth grieving." The right words. She noted much later that he had calculated them rather than felt them. But at the time she was not watching for that distinction. She had not been touched with tenderness in 3 years. She had not had someone ask how she was sleeping, what she was dreaming, whether the work was wearing her down. She had been so focused on forward, always forward, that she had forgotten the small luxury of being looked at. Leo liked him. Julian brought him a book of Korean folktales one Sunday, sat with him on the floor and read it badly, making all the wrong voices, Leo laughing until he had to hold his stomach. Elena stood in the kitchen doorway watching this and felt the particular danger of hope. She let it in anyway. Hope is the muscle you build in the dark so that when the light comes you're strong enough to step into it. 6 months in, Julian proposed. Quiet dinner. No performance, or what appeared to be no performance. A ring beautiful without being showy. Words warm and careful. Elena said yes. The wedding was set for October 2023. What she never knew was that across the city, a man was looking for her. A ghost she had struggled to forget for years. Chongmin Kim was alive. I am sure no one saw that coming. Now, the tempo is rising. I am certain you wouldn't want to leave that seat right now. Let me ask you, do you believe in miracles? Drop your answers in the comments section. I'd be waiting to hear from you. Let's continue. Chongmin's unit had been ambushed in a mountain region so remote it existed on most military maps only as a topographic suggestion. The GPS guiding their extraction had been feeding corrupted coordinates for 3 hours before anyone realized, by which point they were deep in hostile territory with nowhere to go. He was the only survivor. A local family found him unconscious in a riverbed and carried him to their cellar. He spent 11 months in and out of consciousness. The infection alone should have killed him. He had been back in the United States for 4 months before the wedding. He came looking for Elena immediately. Sora intercepted him. She played him a voicemail, Elena's voice, or something close enough to it, words Elena had never said. I never loved Chongmin. I only wanted the insurance. I was seeing someone before he deployed. Don't look for me. He struggled to believe Elena would say that. He was military, and he knew what manipulated audio sounded like. But he was also a man who had come home from the dead to find his wife gone, and grief does something to the mechanisms of doubt. He sat in Sora's spare room with his crutch against the wall and his photograph of Elena face down on the dresser for 3 days. On the 4th day, he picked up his phone. Quietly, to a former intelligence contact, I need you to find someone. And find out who made a recording and how. The trail took weeks. It went through Sora's attorneys, through a forensics report that unraveled the voicemail splice by splice, finding the pitch corrections, the layered environmental audio simulating a room. Through financial records showing that the settlement Sora claimed Elena had taken was a fraudulent transfer from a shell account. Through the hospital birth record showing Leo had been born 9 months exactly after the last time Chongmin had been with his wife. It took him finally to a news clip, Elena Sterling, her maiden name back, giving a speech at a Bankol Tech community event. Standing straight, Leo on her hip, laughing at something someone had said. She did not look like a woman who had run away. She looked like a woman who had been thrown out and built a door. He watched the clip 11 times. Then he found Julian Vance's name. He went still in a way that had nothing to do with his leg. Vance. It had come up in the intelligence debriefing after the ambush. One of several contractors investigated for faulty hardware supplied to Special Operations Units. GPS units. The specific model installed in Chongmin's team's equipment. The investigation had stalled, marked pending. He had not followed it. He had been focused on learning to walk again. He was following it now. What he found, in procurement records and digital fingerprints, Julian Vance had supplied the corrupted GPS units deliberately for a competitor trying to destabilize a defense contract. Chongmin's team had been collateral damage. 7 soldiers died on a mountainside for the sake of a contract maneuver. And now Julian Vance was about to marry the daughter of General Arthur Bankol. The inheritance implications were not subtle. Chongmin got his crutch. He got in the car. The wedding morning was gold and cool. October doing what Georgia October does, like the season is trying to apologize for summer. 200 guests. A string quartet. A live stream already at 11,000 viewers when Elena sat in the bridal suite with her hair being arranged. The gown had taken 3 fittings. She was beautiful in it, and she knew this the way she knew most true things. calmly, without vanity. Kendra, her maid of honor, sharp and loyal, came through the door at 11:47. Elena read her face before she saw the phone. Kendra cleared the room with 2 words. Then she played the video. Her own recording, shot from behind crates in the venue storeroom. Slightly shaky. Julian with a woman. Mia, the one who had always been just a beat behind with compliments, the one who had seemed like a friend and had been something else entirely. Julian's arms around her, his voice low and certain. The role play will be over soon. Once the papers are signed. Once I'm her husband and I've got legal access to co-sign on the Bankol Tech Restructuring Fund. It's a standard marital equity clause. She won't even blink. We're out. I'll make the divorce look mutual. I'll drain what I need first and... How much? Mia said. Enough to give you the life you deserve. Kendra stopped the video. Elena sat very still. There is a particular silence that comes when something you suspected but refused to believe is confirmed. No sound at all. Just a version of the future quietly disappearing. She sat in it for exactly 30 seconds. Give me the video, she said. Do you still want to continue with this wedding? It's clear he doesn't love you. That ingrate is a gold digger, Kendra said as she shared the video. Elena said nothing. She rose to her feet, straightened her face as she walked towards the anticipating groom and guests. 200 people watched Elena walk down the aisle. She walked the way she always walked. Back straight, chin level, steps deliberate. Julian stood at the altar looking moved, performing the slight undoing of a man receiving something beautiful. Arthur sat in the front row, Leo beside him in a small suit, his face luminous with the uncomplicated joy of a child at a celebration. Elena walked to the altar. She stopped. She looked at Julian. One long, clear moment. Then she took her phone from the bouquet, walked to the AV panel the technician had shown her 2 days ago, under the guise of cueing a specific song, and plugged it in. The screens lit up. The live stream audience, now 37,000, watched alongside 200 guests as Kendra's video played full screen and Julian's voice came through the speakers clean and unmistakable. Once the papers are signed. Once I'm her husband. Julian's face moved through several colors. The room was extraordinarily silent. The kind where earrings are audible. When the video ended, Elena turned to face him. I survived an army notification, she said. Her voice was clear, steady, and loud enough to carry to the back row. I survived being locked out of my home while carrying a child. I survived starting over from nothing. I did not survive all of that to be your transaction. She slapped him. Not theatrical. Not performed. The clean, complete sound of a woman using exactly the amount of force the situation required. No more and no less, and it cracked across that beautiful silent room like a gavel. Then she picked up her dress and walked out. She drove with the windows down, the October air cold on her face, the dress pooling around her in the driver's seat. She drove until something inside her, older and quieter than thought, navigated her to Piedmont Park. The Cupid and Psyche Monument. Pale marble in the last evening light. 2 figures frozen in the moment of recognition before reunion. The moment that is better than the embrace because it holds the full weight of everything that came before. She got out of the car in her gown and her bare feet. She had left the heels at the altar and hadn't noticed, and walked to the bench facing the Cupid monument in a park and sat down. She was alone, sobbing at the harshness of reality. At that moment she concluded how cruel life was and how she was never going to love again. Then, she heard something before she saw it. The specific uneven rhythm of someone on a crutch, a sound she would have known in a hurricane, in a fire, at the bottom of a well. She turned and her jaw dropped. Chongmin, she gasped, frozen by shock. It can't be, she whispered, gripping tighter on her gown. The uncertainty in her voice as she called his name again to be sure she wasn't mistaken. Then she slowly turned around, her throat parched, her eyes extended from its socket. Tears began to rush into her eyes, making it glassy. She pinched on her skin to confirm it was really reality. Changmin was thinner than she remembered. His face had a scar tissue along his left cheekbone, silver at his temples that hadn't been there. He stood 10 feet away leaning on a carbon fiber crutch. His eyes were the same. Warm. Endearing. They both stood taking in the shock of the moment. Changmin Kim. The world went perfectly, completely still. "You're dead," she said. "I'm not." His voice was rougher, the warmth rasped at the edges, like wood that has been through water and dried too fast. "I was close. But I'm not." She stood. She sat back down. She stood again. "I buried you. I held a flag and I buried you. Ellie." He stepped forward. Said it the way he had always said it, that compression of her name into something between a word and a fact. "I know. I know everything. The documents. The voicemail. What my mother did to you." His jaw tightened. "All of it." "She called Leo." Elena's voice broke. "Just for a moment. Just briefly. She said he wasn't yours." "I know." He crossed the remaining distance and she stepped forward and they met in the middle and she held on to him with the desperate grip of someone who has been pretending for 3 years not to need anything and has just remembered what need feels like. He held her with his free arm and steadied himself on the crutch and they stood in the park while somewhere across the city her wedding was dissolving into chaos, and she did not care, she could not care about that, because the man who had been the center of her life, the man she had buried and grieved and talked about every night to a small boy with his eyes, was standing and breathing and his heartbeat was real under her ear. She pulled back and looked at his face. She put her hand against the scar on his cheekbone and traced it with her thumb, very slowly, the way you read something important. She was glad for it. She was glad for the scar because it meant he was here to carry it. Glad for the crutch because it meant he was standing. Glad for the roughness in his voice because it meant he was breathing. She told him everything. The porch. The shelter. Leo's arrival in January. Every damn detail of what life has been without him, with teary eyes and rough voice cracked with emotions. She also told him about Julian, her supposed wedding and how she called it off. Changmin listened with a particular quality of attention that meant he was simultaneously receiving and calculating. When she finished, he said, "I know about Julian." He told her. The GPS units. The ambush. The procurement trail that connected a tech investor's shell company to the corrupted hardware that had killed his team and nearly killed him. "What? You mean it was all Julian? That snake?" Elena's stomach twisted with rage. "I want to crush him so bad right now. Damn it. He better run so far so I don't get to see him." She bit down on her teeth. Elena paused for a while, heaving heavily. "He walked into my life on purpose," she said. "Yes. He sat across from me and asked about you and looked sad." "He was good at it," Changmin said. "You were healing. He used that. It is not a reflection of your judgment." His voice went quieter. "And he will answer for it." She looked at him. "What have you done?" He told her about the documentation, the forensics team, the prosecutor's office that had been briefed 2 days ago. She was quiet. "It's getting dark, baby. I need to get you home and perhaps get to see my son," Changmin said with a soft smile. Elena nodded. "We need to talk about your mother, too." He did not flinch. "Yes." She stood. Looked down at her bare feet on the park grass. The incongruity of it arrived all at once. Here she was, in $50,000 of wedding dress, having just changed the trajectory of several lives, and she had no shoes. "I left them at the altar," she said, half to herself. The corner of his mouth moved. The ghost of his smile, never performed, never deployed, always just the thing that happened to his face when something genuine surprised him. "You were always better without them," he said. Elena laughed. A real one. Unguarded. Rising from somewhere below the chest. It startled both of them. Then he was almost smiling, that half-smile she had loved from the beginning because it meant she had gotten past the careful surface of him to something real underneath. "Come on," she said, and held out her hand. Days after, Julian Vance was arrested at his Midtown Atlanta hotel on a Thursday morning by federal marshals. Procurement fraud. Falsification of military equipment records. Conspiracy in connection with the deaths of 7 soldiers. Arthur had pulled a single thread, and the rest unraveled with the efficiency of something that had been waiting a long time to come undone. In the courthouse, Julian looked desolate for a man who had calculated every risk but forgot the one that mattered. That a woman he'd marked as a target had a father who was a 4-star general, a husband who was military intelligence, and a child she would burn the world down to protect. He lost, and he paid dearly. After the proceedings, Julian was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. The drive to Sora Kim's fashion house on a Sunday morning in November was 45 minutes. Chongmin drove. Elena sat beside him. Leo was at the Bankole estate with his grandpa, Arthur, learning to identify cloud formations. Leo had already informed Elena with great seriousness that the one over the house was a cumulonimbus. Kim Noir occupied the top 2 floors of a Buckhead building. All glass and clean lines. Sora was in her design studio, surrounded by the organized evidence of a woman who had made control into an art form. She turned when they came in. She saw Chongmin first, and something moved in her face, relief and grief and something complicated. And then she saw Elena beside him, and the blankness came down like a screen. "Chongmin, you knew we were coming," he said. His voice was not loud. "Elena called you 2 days ago. You had time to prepare." He crossed the room toward her. She did not step back because Sora Kim had never stepped back in her life, but she went very still. "You forged medical records. You constructed a voicemail from spliced audio. You froze my wife's accounts using a clause you knew I would never have invoked. You locked my pregnant wife out of her home on the day of my supposed funeral." Each sentence laid down like a stone. "You did all of this because she was black?" Sora's chin lifted. "Say it," he said. "Say that's the reason." The studio was entirely quiet. She looked at Chongmin, her only son. The mountain range written on his face. The crutch. The evidence of what the world had done to him when she was not there. He had survived. He had come back. And the first thing he had done was look for Elena. At this point, she knew she had lost. "I was afraid," she said finally. The words came slowly, the way words come when they have never been said and the mouth doesn't know how to form them. "I was afraid she would take you from me. That I would become peripheral," Chongmin said quietly. "Yes. You were afraid of being peripheral. And rather than accept the place in our life that was freely offered to you, grandmother, mother-in-law, present, you chose to take her apart instead." Sora's clasped hands had knuckles that had gone white. "I'm sorry. You called my son a bastard. You said I had fertility issues. How cruel can you be, Mum? Gosh. I itch so much to call you evil because that is exactly what you did." His voice cracked. "You stood at a graveyard and called my child a bastard to the faces of the people who came to mourn me." Sora closed her eyes. "Amoni." He said the word differently this time. "Fully. I am not here to perform a scene. I am here to tell you something true. This is the last time you will see me, or Elena, or Leo. I just wanted to make it clear." His voice rang across the room, leaving no room for arguments. "No. Baby, no. Don't do this." Sora Kim went to her knees. It was not graceful. Her knees met the floor and she made a small involuntary sound and her hands pressed flat before her and she bowed her head, and she said, in Korean, words Elena did not know but understood from the shape of them. From the sound of something that had been locked a very long time finally coming open with all the noise of the rust giving way. "I am sorry. I was wrong. I was afraid and proud and wrong." Then, in English, looking up, "She was not what I imagined for you, but right now I can see how wrong I was to judge. She was better. Far better than I am." She stopped. "I have been wrong about what matters for a very long time." Elena looked at this woman on her knees. The woman who had stood at a graveside with a legal folder. The woman who had slapped her in front of mourners. The woman who had changed the locks while she was 7 months pregnant. She wanted to agree with her husband, but all she could feel was pity for Sora. Please, Elena, forgive me. I am sorry for all I put you through. From the depth of my heart, I promise to be good and I do whatever you want to prove this, she sobbed. Please, I don't want to lose my son again. Help me beg him. Please. She stood there for a while staring down at Sora, then bent over to meet her eye level. What makes one smart and human is up in the brain and in the heart and not the color of the skin or race. You always saw me as worthless, a dent to your family image. But I loved you. I loved your son and all I wanted was a happy family. Regardless, I still love you and would never hate you. Elena reached out to Sora's face and wiped off tears from her face. I'd talk to him. I'm sure he'd listen. Elena walked across the room and put her hand on Chongmin's arm. Honey, she's still your mother, Elena said. And then, because he needed to hear it specifically from her, one day, Leo should know his grandmother. You wouldn't have to lie to him, or would you? A long silence stretched between them. Chongmin recessed his words and decisions. Then he reached down and took his mother's arm and helped her up. I'm sorry, Chong, Sora sobbed, hugging her son tightly. She reached out always, pulling Elena into the hug. Weeks later at the Bankols' estate. They had dinner together on a Friday night. Arthur, Elena, Chongmin, Leo and Sora. Leo stole everyone's heart with his smile. Sora met her grandson for the first time and it was magical. Mom, Grandma is beautiful, Leo blabbed. Everyone bursted into laughter. Elena looked at her boy, 3 years old, smart, inquisitive and charming. She looked at Chongmin and they both smiled. Yes, Grandma is gorgeous and she loves you too, Elena responded. You can go spend the next weekend with her. Leo hopped in excitement and ran to Sora. He climbed into her lap and gave her a hug. Sora placed a warm kiss on his forehead, embracing him. The end. Thank you for making it to the end of this story. If you enjoyed the story, kindly show your support by liking, sharing, and subscribing to this channel. I would love you to tell me the part in this story that touched you more. What is the burial, or the moment Chongmin came back to life? Or was it the moment Sora begged for forgiveness? If you were Elena, would you forgive that easily? I'd be waiting for your response.